Okay, what's the name of the series that we are in? Hey, listen. What's the name of the series we are in?
Simon Says.
All right, what have we been talking about in Simon Says? Obedience. Yes. Tell me something you've learned about obedience. Tell me something you've learned about obedience.
Obedience without prayer brings spiritual destruction.
Boom. Obedience without prayer is spiritual destruction. What else? I got a bunch right here. We can keep going.
Prayer without obedience is spiritual. No.
Yeah.
Spiritual.
Starts with an I.
Arrogance.
Nope. That starts with an A. Irrelevance.
I learned that simple obedience leads to difficult obedience.
Yes, that's a good one. What?
Obedience leading from prayer is spiritual supremacy.
Boom. Obedience resulting from prayer is spiritual supremacy. Keep going. We got more. Obedience creates what? Obedience creates what?
Opposition.
No. Well, yeah. Invites opposition, but that's favored position invites direct opposition. Obedience creates what? Starts with an O. It's not opposition. Opportunity. Opposition loves to define itself to you, right? We learned that Jesus never calls us to a place that He isn't at already. We learn that fear, if we live in it, can cause us to forget who Jesus is, but we can use fear to our advantage, right? If we define what the fear is, we can use it to help define what our faith is, right? That's what we learned on obedience. And so now we're on part 3, and tonight I have to ask you a very, very critical question. You want to know what the question is? Cool. Just wait till the end of the message and I'll tell you. Tonight we are calling this message, and I need the PowerPoint. We are calling this message.
Drum roll, please.
Did I click that?
You did it.
Okay, stand the gap. We are calling this message Stand the Gap. We're going to read a story. Now here's how we're going to read the story. I want to bring the slides up on there, okay? And one of you is going to read the slides, and then you're going to tell me what happened in that little short paragraph, right? Because I got to make sure you're paying attention. Now, the story is from a guy that we've already talked about in this series, okay? So this might sound a little bit familiar. We've already talked about this guy in the series. We are going to be in Daniel chapter 1, okay? We're going to read the first 16 verses, but we're going to skip the 7th verse, okay? So we're reading 1 through 6 and then 8 through 16. You'll see why later. Here we go. Who wants to read this first slide? Go.
In the 3rd year of the reign of
Come on, who?
King of Judah,
Nebuchadnezzar.
king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and
Besieged it.
And the Lord delivered
The king of Judah.
into his hands, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of God in
Babylonia.
and put in the treasure house of his house.
So what happened?
So, wait, why?
Besieged means take over, by the way. That'll help you out a little, because that was the key word. What happened? Anybody, what happened? What you got?
Basically this king came and took over Jerusalem and
Took over and took all their stuff, right? All right. So that's where we're at. All right. Now look what the king does next. Who's reading the next slide? All right, you're reading the next slide. Go.
And then the king ordered
Ashpenaz.
Ashpenaz, chief of his court, officials to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the
Nobility.
nobility not to have a physical defect. And so showing aptitude for every kind of ability, well put into and qualified to serve in the king's house.
So what happened? Yeah, they brought Josiah into the court, right? They brought Josiah into the court. Look what it said. It said a young man without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's house.
All of that.
They brought on a lot of Josiahs. No, seriously though. They brought out all these Israelites, basically the people that had nothing wrong with them, the people that had a great chance, and they were going to use them in their temple, right? In their place. They were going to use them. What just happened?
The computer is locked.
Told you, man.
What'd you tell
All right. I'm going to read this next part. Here we go. As that comes back on, I'm going to read this next part. You tell me what happens. So after he brought the people in, he was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So what happened?
So they were trained for 3 years, and then they got put into the good people out.
Yeah, and what else did we learn? We learned some specifics of who was there, right? Who did we learn was there? We learned 4 people were there. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Yes, they're all men. I know that's weird names, but they're all men. All right, now we're going to skip verse 7. All right, so we follow along so far. We're going to skip verse 7. But Daniel resolved. Everybody say that. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink." What happened?
Be scared.
Daniel was afraid that he would
He wasn't afraid. Daniel just said, "I'm not going to do it." He said, "I'm not going to do it," and he asked permission not to do it. But the guy that he asked permission to said, "I'm afraid of the king, so let me talk to him about it." All right? So then the guy keeps on talking to Daniel. He said, why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink." What happened? What happened? All right, sweet. We're back up. Oh, we're right there? Okay. What happened? What happened? What did I just read?
King said he could give him this and this and this.
Yeah, he said, why would I do that? The king didn't say it. Daniel said that. He's like, "Why would I do that? You'll look worse than everybody." Daniel's like, "All right, bet. Try me then. 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables and water and see what happens." All right, let's just see what happens. All right, next part. Who wants to read it? After the challenge, Daniel said what to the people? Go.
Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food, and the wine they were to drink, and gave the vegetables instead.
What happened?
The king took away
He took the bet. He called the bet. He said, "All right, well, let's do it." And then they looked better. Actually, we didn't read that part, but that's what's what happened. They looked better, and it was like, "Oh, cool, they're better." Anyways, so let me tell you what happened in the first part of the story. What happened was these people had a way of living. Okay? They had this way of living. They followed God. They had their culture, their styles, the way that they did things, and then the enemy came in and stole it from them. And they said, "You're going to live the way that we want you to live. You're going to adapt to the lifestyle that we have. You're going to eat the food that we eat. You're going to talk the way that we talk, and there's nothing you can do about it." Okay? That's what happened. So one of the questions, this isn't the question I want to ask you tonight, but the first question I want to ask you tonight is simple. The question is, are you a Christian? Okay? We would all say,
Yes.
sweet. Okay. See, tonight, as y'all know, this is one of the last opportunities that I'm going to have to speak to you for a good bit of time, at least for the next little while. So I wanted to make sure we got this message right. Okay? I wanted to make sure that I was exactly what I was speak exactly what I needed to speak about, and to challenge you the exact way that I need to challenge you. See, the other day I had a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about just how crazy the world is. We were talking about all that junk, and the world's spinning out of control. And this person said something to me in this conversation that really got my mind rolling. He said this. He said, I used to tell people I'm a Christian, but I don't anymore. Because what a Christian is supposed to be isn't what it is anymore. He said the value of that word, being a Christian, has lost its meaning. That's what he said. So here's the question I want you to ask yourself tonight. No, this is not the question. This is just another question. My question is, what does it mean to be a Christian? I'm not asking you what it means to walk in this faith. This isn't a message on what it means to go after Jesus. But here's what I'm asking. When you tell someone you're a Christian, how do they view you? When you say, I'm a Christian, does that person view you more negatively after that? Or do they view you more positively? Because here's the truth. Being a Christian is supposed to mean something. We're supposed to be living examples of who Christ is. We're supposed to be people that lead the way. We're supposed to be a people that set the standard. But we live in a world where Christians are being led by unbelievers, and we are allowing the world to push us around and try and take our freedom away in Christ. So what's the problem? Why is it that this is happening to Christians? What happened to the meaning of Christianity? What if I told you it was our fault? You see, because the reality is, we have made Christianity an activity rather than a responsibility. We've made Christianity an activity rather than a responsibility. Here's what I've noticed about Christianity in our world today. We've created an approach to God that doesn't even involve God. We've been so busy trying to maintain a Christian image that we've forgotten that we were made in the image of God. In other words, we would rather do things that make us look like Christians than actually follow Jesus. We're so concerned with having peace with everyone that we are willing to lower our biblical standard in order to avoid conflict. We've decided to twist the truth of God's word so that we can feel good about our sinful lifestyles. We've allowed Christianity to be about what we do rather than how we live. And we've allowed Christianity to be a club rather than a faith. So when I ask you what it means to be a Christian in today's world, a lot of us would say, follow Jesus, be a good person, avoid sin. But the reality in today's world is that being a Christian, honestly, is nothing more than a title. It's nothing more than a title. And so many people in the world know how to be good Christians, but they don't know Jesus. We'll do everything that we're supposed to do without doing anything we don't want to do, even if Jesus is telling us to. We have replaced a standard of living that the Bible requires with a standard of living that we've created on our own so that we can feel comfortable in our sin. So the question is, what happened? When did Christianity stop becoming about Jesus? When in the world did we forget to involve Jesus in the very movement that he started? The reality is, we are dealing with the same thing that Daniel and his friends were dealing with in this day. We used to live in a time where being in love with Jesus was the way of life, but the enemy came and deceived the hearts of many people, and these people stopped seeking Jesus. They started living their own way, and sinful living became the normal. Now Christians are having to deal with the same thing these people dealt with. The leadership of our people has been taken over by the enemy. We have been asked to adopt to the lifestyle of the world, and we're supposed to adopt to the customs and sins of the world and just accept it. And look at the scripture. This is exactly what the people dealt with. Look at it again. It's on the screen. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court official, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. Look at this. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. In other words, they were to learn what the people of that land learned and talk the way that those people talked. The king assigned them the daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to eat and drink what those people were to eat and drink. And they were trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. They were trained to live in this lifestyle so that they could actually participate in the way of living of the enemy. This is what happened. They were taken away from their way of living. They were expected to learn and accept the way of living of everyone else, feed on the things that everyone else did, and learn to live the way that everyone else did. And so my question is, though this is not the question, but this is my question, what would happen if today's Christian was placed in the same situation that these people were placed in that day? Let me take it one step further. What if I told you today's Christian is placed in the same situation that these people were placed in that day? Let me prove it to you. We live in a world where being attracted to the same sex is a beautiful thing, and anyone that disagrees is full of hatred. We live in a world where being a virgin and sexually pure before marriage is actually something that we should have shame about, and we're ignorant if we're living this. We live in a world where it's okay to murder children simply because the mother just decides that they don't want to have the baby. We live in a world where it's more common to hear the name of God attached to cussing and cursing than to actually talk about what God's doing in His people. We live in a world where church has become a weekend option rather than a holy day set apart for God. We live in a world that has very intentionally and directly allowed the enemy to come in and take away our style of living, our way of living that we are called to, and forcing us to try to adapt to the ways, lifestyles, and customs of the enemy. And the worst part about it is, it's because we've allowed it. It's the Christian's fault. We have allowed the enemy to do what the enemy wants to do. Why have we done this? Because we are so scared to go against the flow. We would rather rather than stand our ground and fight, we've tried to keep everyone happy and stay on everyone's good side. And because of this, we have allowed people to take Jesus from us because we're too scared to hurt anyone's feelings. But I need you to see what the cost of this is. I need you to see where this world is heading if we continue down this path. Because it's easy to just be like, no, this isn't true. You know, I got a happy life. Nothing's really bad. Everything's going. But let me tell you where this world is going if we continue down this path. Okay. If we continue down this path, there is coming a day when people will be fined and even sent to prison just for showing up to church. If we continue down this path, there's coming a day when singing and worshiping God won't be allowed in some churches. If we continue down this path, laws will be passed to allow children to be murdered in their mother's womb, even until 9 months being pregnant, and even after the baby is born. Check this out. This will alarm you. If we continue down this path, there will be this great push to make being a pedophile legal because it's a clinical disease. And some will believe the age of sexual consent to be as low as 4 years old. If we continue down this path, people that are living in gay, lesbians, and transgender lifestyles will not be able to be denied a religious position in the church because of their sexual orientation. And to do so will be considered a hate crime. If we continue down this path, you will be forced to believe something that someone else has decided, and if you don't, you will be punished. Here's the truth. We're already living in that. Those aren't things that I just said that if we continue down. Those are things from our world today. And it's only going to get worse. But this is the same situation that Daniel faced when his people were being taken over by the enemy and the people tried to strip him of his biblical standard of living. If you remember 2 weeks ago, this is the same Daniel that developed the prayer life. This is the same Daniel that we were able to learn that obedience creates opportunity and favored position invites direct opposition. This is the same Daniel that would choose praying to God over his own life. This is the same Daniel that was willing to go into a lion's den, hungry lions, even if it cost him everything. And in this moment, when it all counted, it would have made so much more sense for him to just eat the food, to just do what everybody else was doing. Everybody would have been happy. Nobody would have said a word. But Daniel did something in verse 8 that teaches us something. Look at what he did. But Daniel resolved. Daniel resolved. Simple. Daniel resolved. He resolved to do well. He resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He had a choice to make. Am I going to keep everyone happy and just do what they're asking? Or am I going to stand my ground, stand for what's right, and keep my biblical standard no matter the punishment? And in the moment where it counted the most, seemed like an ordinary moment where all he had to do was say, okay, I'll do it. He looked the people in the eye and he said, no, I'm not going to do that. He stood his ground, looked them in the eye, and in one of the most spiritual moments he said, no, I'm not. I can't. I know you're telling me to do that, but God's not calling me to live that way. Even if it cost him everything, he looked them in the eye and said, no. You see, Daniel resolved in his heart that even though everyone else was doing it, it wasn't right. Daniel basically came to the place where the biblical standard of living was more important than the majority, was more important than his feelings, and more important than what anyone else thought of him. And so here's what I need you to see tonight. The things that you were being taught in school, the things that you were being taught by your friends, the things that you were being taught by this world are wrong. Plain and simple. No, I'm not talking about like the teacher telling you 2 + 2 is 4. I'm not saying that's wrong. But the culture that they're teaching you, the things that they're trying to get you to believe, the patterns of this world that they're trying to get you to adapt to, they are wrong. And God is looking for a people to stand up and say, majority rules no longer. Majority does not rule, but God rules. This world is headed straight to destruction. End of it. And your generation is the last hope. Now, I know you've heard that so many times. And yeah, this is our generation. We got to do this thing. But I'm serious. You're the last hope. And if you don't decide to stop living for yourself, if you do not realize that there are feelings much more important than you, that there are things much more important than you, if you do not stand up for what is right and not what everyone else says, if you do not stand up and do something rather than be a cute little Christian in your cute little world, this world has no hope. And here's my whole sermon in a sentence. And this is what you have to realize. If you are going to come to a place in your walk with God where you progress, if you're going to change the world, then you have to come to a place where you realize that your obedience to God might cause more problems than your disobedience. You obeying God might stir up more trouble than your disobedience. You saying yes to God might make people mad at you. But it's time that we start causing problems. It's time that we start trying so hard to stay comfortable and take a stand for what is right. It's time that we be willing to cause a little bit of friction and push back in a sinful world. But here is how I want to go into this altar time. Yeah, we're already at the end of this message. I know that was quick. I know what some of you are thinking. I want to do what's right. That's me. I want to do what's right. Even if it causes problems, I want to do what's right. I want to be a representation of Jesus in my living. I want to do that. But if you're like me, there's times where you can feel like there's no hope. You can feel like this definition of a Christian has gone too far. And even if you do stand up and live what's right, even if you do take a stand, that people are going to have such this negative view of Christian, the new name of Christian that the enemy has tried to project. The enemy has tried to make people think that Christian means a whole new thing, and you feel like there's no hope. I want to remind you of a story that you may have heard before. I'm going to ask you to start the altar music. Altar music. You can lower it on the soundboard too, so it's not overly. It's a story you may have heard of before. See, there was this king, and this king was really full of himself. Okay, really full of himself. So much so that he built this statue. Okay? this king built this statue. And when he built this statue, he said that all these people had to bow down to this statue. Okay? It was a statue of himself, by the way. That's how full of himself he was. They said he had to bow down to this statue. Okay? He said, music's going to play and you bow down. And there was these three boys that were on the scene that day that loved Jesus, that were in love with God and just had this relationship. And they're surrounded, standing by all these other people that are around this statue. And the music starts playing, and slowly but surely, all these people start bowing to this statue. And with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people bowing down, these three boys are just standing there because they refused. Because much like Daniel, when the king said, "You got to do this," they looked at him and said, "No, I'm not going to do that." But see, the punishment for not bowing was they were going to have to be thrown into a fire, burned alive. But they said, "No, I'm not going to do that." It was going to cost them their life, and they said, "No, I'm not going to do that." So this is how the story goes. They go and they're taken to the king. And the king says, "You didn't really mean that. So I'm going to give you another chance to bow down." And they look the king in the face. They say, "You know what? This might be the end of our lives. We might be thrown into this fire. And everything ends. This could be it for us, but we're not going to bow because our obedience isn't to you, king. Our obedience is to the king." And they said, "We're not going to do it." And this made the king so mad. And the king had the men thrown into the fire. And he had the fire cranked up so much hotter that the people throwing them into the fire evaporated. That's how hot the fire was. And the king sits back and thinks that he's won. But then he looks in the fire and sees a fourth man in the fire. And it looks like the Son of God. And this is what we talk about. We talk about how Jesus was with these men in the fire. What often gets overlooked is what happens next. Because it's the king's looking with his pride and with his sin and with his hatred for these three boys. He looks at the obedience that they did. And his heart begins to change. And he says, "I hated what they did, but now I'm saying, praise be to their God. Praise be to their God." And let me tell you something. This king was a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. The same king that had Daniel and his men adapt to the new style of living. We skipped verse 7. Let me remind you of what verse 7 says. We get another detail about Daniel and his friends that we didn't get before. Check out what verse 7 says. The chief official gave them new names. In other words, the enemy tried to give them a new name. Much like the enemy in our life has tried to give a new name to Christians. He's tried to give a new style of living to Christians. He's tried to project something different on what it means to be a Christian. Check out what the new names of the people were. To Daniel, he gave the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, he gave the name Shadrach. To Mishael, he gave the name Meshach. To Azariah, he gave the name Abednego. It was the same three men that would eventually be thrown into the fire. But when we talk about these men being thrown into the fire, we don't talk about it being Hananiah. We don't talk about it being Mishael. We don't talk about it being Azariah. We talk about it with the names that the enemy gave them. And we say that the names that the enemy gave them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is who's thrown into the fire. Here's what I'm trying to get you to see. We can sit around and say the enemy has given Christians a new name, and there's no hope. We cannot last. We cannot survive. Or we can take courage with this new name and say, you know what, enemy? You've given me a new name, but I'm building a legacy with this new name. I'm taking a stand with this new name. I'm going to reverse the trend with this new name, and I am going to stand my ground, and I'm going to look the enemy in the face and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And with this, and then we'll go after God. Is that PowerPoint back up? God so badly wants to restore this nation. He so badly wants to bring us back to Him. And He so badly wants to change the world. But He's looking for somebody to stand the gap. He's looking for somebody that's going to say yes to Him and say no to what the world's trying to push. He's looking for somebody that's willing to cause a little bit of problems. He's willing for somebody to accept the fact that obeying Him might cause more problems than disobeying Him. He's looking for somebody that He can use. And if we're not careful, we can make the same mistake that the Israelites made long before this. When the prophet Ezekiel was trying to get them. See, in this time, God was about to punish the Israelites because they had been destroyed, they had been sinful, they had turned their backs on God. He was about to destroy them. But He didn't want to do this. He said, I'm looking for somebody to stand the gap. I'm looking for somebody to take a stand. And Ezekiel records God's heart in 22:30. He says this. He said, I looked for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land so I would not have to destroy it. But I found no one. What would happen we made the mistake of saying, Jesus, it's much easier to disobey. It's much easier to go with the flow. It's much easier to not cause problems. Jesus is so badly wanting to restore and save us. And He's looking for somebody to stand the gap. My question is He going to look at your life? Is He going to look at your world? Is He going to look at this group have to say, I found no one? Or is He going to look at us and is He going to say, they're going to stand the gap? It might cost them things that they don't want to go through. It might cost them positions. It might cost them friends. It might cost them their life. But they're going to obey me and they're going to stand the gap. So the question that I want to ask you tonight is this. Will you stand the gap? And I say, why not here? Why not now? Why not here? We think God has to use a bunch of people and a whole bunch of everybody just coming and just having revival break out, but none of that can happen without one person saying, use me, God. And so this is the last opportunity that I get to speak to you guys for a little bit. And I don't want to leave not challenging you. I don't want to leave with this being just another service. So what we're going to do is we're going to go after God. We're going to play this music, and I don't want structure. We're not going to do the whole thing where it's, take 10 minutes, whatever, just do whatever. We're gonna just go with it. Okay? If you feel like God's challenging you or speaking to you to stand up and challenge everybody else, then do it. If you feel like God's just speaking to you and trying to tell you all these different things, then listen. If you feel like God's leading you to pray for yourself or pray for somebody else, then do it. But you have to be willing to obey.